There you go. Okay, so today I'm going to tie your classic saltwater, freshwater, warm water shrimp pattern. This is what they call a mantis shrimp. Originally, the original shrimp pattern I was looking at was this guy, which is somewhat similar, but a little bit different construction. But changed my mind because I had tied a similar pattern like this before for my friend in Australia. So it's tied very much like a clouser minnow. So it's the kind of techniques that you'll use here, things you would use for a clouser minnow. Now, the hook is what I'm using is a size 4, and it's supposed to be a saltwater hook. Standard 1x long. So I'll get that hook out. Oh, and this is a Mustad O'Shaughnessy. Right here in the bag. And put it in the vise. So that's the hook. Now the second piece of preparation I'm going to do is this thing's going to have a set of eyes. And these eyes are, if you buy them commercially, they're called EP eyes, and they're basically a piece of plastic on the end of a stick of monofilament. And when you get Robinsons to bring them in, they're very pricey. So I'm making my own. And the trick with making your own is to get a piece of 20 to 25 pound mono. It's going to be a little hard to see up against my blue shirt. And I cut about a 4-inch piece off. Get a pair of tweezers and grab them about 1/4 to 3/8 of an inch from the end of the mono. And I think you guys have seen this before. This is my friendly neighborhood fish-shaped barbecue lighter. And I'm gonna get it to produce a flame. Please do that for me. Come on. There we go. And I just bring the flame up near the mono and it melts it down into a little ball. Now, the purpose of the ball is that if you just use the next step without the little ball, the UV resin that I'm going to stick on the end here will just pull off the end of the mono. So now what I do is I take my Loon extra thick UV resin. And by the way, this was my friend in Australia. This is his trick. And I put a little glob of UV resin on the end. And this, because this is thick, it takes a bit of time to come out. I got a blob of that UV resin. And I stick it on the end there. And I kind of have to wave it around a bit to get it to take the proper shape. Get a little blob. And then I hit it with get the right shape, I hit it with my UV light to solidify it. Make sure it's good and dry. And then what happens is that little ball on the end keeps it from pulling off. And then what I do is, because it's clear, I want it colored. So I take these waterproof markers that I think I've talked to you guys before. This is a Letraset product. And it has 2 different ends. It has a fine pointed end and a thick pointed end. The other ones that are on the market are these Pantone ones. This is a black one, and it's got the thick end. It actually has 2 sizes of little pointy bits on the other end. You can actually have a thick one and a thin one. Quite a good little product. And then all I do is I take my pen and I color the ends of those. And I set them aside to dry because it takes a couple of minutes for that Pantone pen to set up. So while that's happening, I also take a pair of dumbbell eyes. Now I didn't normally use pink, and I didn't have pink. So being resourceful and having a stock of these things, I actually took one of those dumbbell eyes with my tweezers, and then I grabbed the red pen and I colored the eyes so that it just kind of blends in a little more with the pattern. Thread, 8/0 pink. Now you start this like you would a typical clouser minnow. I'm going to start right behind the eye and a few wraps of thread to close that little gap between the wire where it's bent around and the hook shank. Sometimes you can get a tippet stuck in there. And I'm going to wrap the thread down the hook shank almost to the point, pretty close to where the point is, not to the bend, but to the point. I'm going to bring my thread back up to sort of the 1/3 point on the shank. I want to leave a bit of shank out in front for the nose of the fly. Now, like Bob Clouser taught me, the trick here is to build a bump. So you do multiple wraps to build a bump of thread on the hook shank. You take your eyes and you bring them up from behind, from the bend end, at a bit of an angle, right up till it hits the bump. Then you go across it diagonally with 2 or 3 wraps. Then you twist the eyes square to the hook shank and go 3 or 4 wraps the other way. And that snugs it up against that little bump. And then you just make sure you get several wraps diagonally one way, several wraps diagonally the other way. And that's the trick of the little bump, is it keeps the eyes from spinning around the hook shank or moving up and down the shank. So now once you're there, the fly is going to be fished inverted. So the first bit of stuff that you're going to put on the hook shank is going to be the bottom of the fly. So I'm going to bring my thread up just a little bit in front of the eyes. And for the bottom of this fly, you want a soft, light colored, in this case, white fur. And I have this beautiful Arctic fox fur, which is really fluffy and really soft, but it makes, when it gets wet, it compacts down nicely. So I'm going to take a good chunk of this from the hide, not too much, but enough, sort of, if you were to spread it out, it would be a little more than a width of the gap of the hook. I'm going to cut that off right down near the hide. Now this stuff is fairly long. So it's got a bit of fuzz at the bottom. So I'm going to stretch it out and sort of grab it halfway, and then I'm going to pull all this loose fuzz out, because that won't tie down properly. I'm going to measure it, and I want the white fuzz to extend at least shank length past the bend. And that's about as long as this is going to be. So what I'm going to do is cut this off square. I'm going to bunch it up nice and tight, and I'm going to hold it down at an angle to the hook shank right in front of the eye, with the butt ends right behind the eye of the hook. I'm going to do a pinch wrap here and cinch it down onto the hook shank. And this again is a typical way you'd start a Bob Clouser minnow. Wrap that front back really good. Then come behind the eye of the hook and wrap down and hold this up at about a 45-degree angle and wrap it right back to right just about where the point of the hook is. And that's the underside of the fly. Everything from here now is on the other side of the fly. So I'm going to turn my vise upside down. So the first thing is that, that I'm going to put in here a fur that is going to be the top of the fly. And I have more Arctic fox. And this time it's a brown. And pardon me, nice thing about this brown Arctic fox is that it's got lots of skinny fibers and thick fibers. It's a mixed length fur with some fuzz in the bottom. So when it gets wet, it's going to form a bit of a tapered body because of all the different lengths of fur in it. I'm going to take not a huge piece here, and I'm going to tie this on near the back of the hook, near the bend, right under the point probably. And I don't want too much. Now, this is going to go on in 3 layers. And the first layer is mostly to keep the rubber legs that I'm going to add and the tinsel that I'm going to add from collapsing down underneath the fly. So I'm going to come right in here and I'm going to trim that tight to the skin. Do the same thing, pull out some of the fluff just so that it binds down easier. Again, I'm going to measure that. I'm going to try and keep it to roughly the same length. Now, when you're working in the, pardon me, the underside of the hook, when you tie this stuff on, you want some on either side of the hook shank and the point. So the way to do that is I'm going to hold it by the point and I'm going to blow on it. And that'll blow some on either side of that point. And I'm going to hold it there. I'm going to make that wrap around the hook shank and bind the butts down. And I'm just going to make sure that I've got some on either side. I'm going to take my bodkin and make sure there's about equal amounts on either side of the hook shank. So now it's out of the way. So the next little bit is I'm going to come ahead of that about halfway to the eye. And I'm going to take the next little bit here, which is crystal flash, wherever my crystal flash went. Where'd my crystal flash go? There it is. So this is called gray ghost crystal flash, but it's sort of greenish in color. And what you want is a little contrast, the color of the body of the fly. And I'm just going to get a couple of strands of that stuff over here. I use this a lot, so there's not a lot left. So the package looks a little skinny. So what I'm going to do with this is I'm just going to, these aren't going to be very long legs, so I'm going to cut them in half. So I'm going to fold them in half and then take my scissors and cut the loop. And then I'm going to fold it in half again and wrap it around the thread halfway so that the ends line up. I'm going to bring that up, get this fuzz out of the way, bring the ends up and tie it down right smack on top of the hook shank with 1-2 wraps. Then I'm going to separate them and I'm going to put 3 or 4 strands on one side of that hook and 3 or 4 on the other. And I might need my bodkin to do that. So I got 2 or 3 on one side, 4 on the other side. That's close enough. And I'm just going to hold them onto the side of the hook shank and wrap over top of them back a little bit. And that's going to cinch them in place, 2 on either side of the point of the hook. And those, it turns out that those are about the proper length. I might have 1 or 2 bits that are long. I'm going to tidy up. And the next thing I have is rubber legs. There we go. And these are called silly legs because they're made out of silicone. And these happen to be a brown marked legs, like a zebra stripe leg. That is fair. Now these ones are quite skinny little rubber legs. They're not particularly heavy. Some of the rubber legs are quite thick and heavy, and they would droop a lot more. These are slightly lighter. So I'm going to do the same thing with them. I'm going to take one and wrap it right around the thread halfway. I'm going to bring it up and mark it on top, tie it down on top of the hook shank on the near side, sort of a 45-degree angle on the near side, and wrap it back, and then let them hang. Bring the thread forward a couple of wraps. Then I'm going to tie in the other pair and bring them up, and I'm going to wrap them down on the same place, sort of 45 degrees to the top of the shank on the other side, and then let them hang down the other side of the hook shank. And to make sure these are all roughly the same length, come on, where'd you go? I'm going to let them hang down, not pulling on them. I'm just going to trim them about the same length as the tail. Cinch them down, 2 on one side, 2 on the other. Bring my thread back up to sort of that halfway point. Now this is where I'm going to put in some more of the tan fur, and the purpose of this is to cover the legs a bit, so that the legs are stuck in the middle of the fly and not on the top or the bottom. And I'm not going to make it too big because I don't want to make this fly too bulky. And I want the eyes that I'm going to put on to be between layers of the brown fur. So once again, I'm going to measure this about the same length. I'm going to blow on it, set it down over the point of the hook. And I'm going to tie it down right there, sort of halfway in between the eye of the hook and where the rest of the fur is tied in. Tie the butts down. And you can see I've left a little space there between the eyes and where that fur is tied in. And the reason for that is that's where the eyes are going to go now. I'll tie them there. So I'm going to use the little red ones. And I just, when I do the monofilament thing, I just cut a piece and I put an eye on each end. So I need to cut that in half because I'm going to do these one at a time. Now there's a little bit of curve to these, and I'm not going to try and take that out. I'm going to hold the eye so that it's on the side of the hook with the curve facing out and up. And when I measure it, I'm going to try and make those eyes, I'd say about 2/3 between where the fur is, halfway between where the fur is tied in and where the tip of the fur is, because I want them to stick out the back. I'm going to hold that in my left hand and take my pliers, and right where my fingers are, I'm going to flatten the mono with my non-serrated jaw pliers. That's going to help it get stuck down it. A little bit of spit keeps some of that furry fur out of the way while I do this. So I'm going to lay that flattened piece of mono down where the thread is and I'm going to put a couple of wraps and adjust the angle, and I may have to cross this end of the fly over top of the hook shank so that the eye sticks out. And I might bend it a little bit to make sure it sticks out enough. I'm going to give it a couple of good wraps. Double check where he is. And then I'm going to wrap forward and a couple of wraps in front of the eyes on the shank and trim them off. I'm going to take the other one and I'm going to put him in the same position on the other side of the hook, approximately the same place. Again, grab it with my fingers and flatten it. It just helps it, again, get down on the hook shank. I'm going to place it in place. Better bring my thread back first. Back to where I tied the other one in. Put it there. A couple of light wraps. And then I'm going to try and place it. And this is where you can make the adjustment in length so that it's the same distance from the front of the fly. The two flies are now equal distant. I'm going to get some more wraps there, get it good solid, come in front, a couple of wraps there. And I'm going to wrap in front of that and then trim it off. There we go. Now I'm going to just come and pull my fuzzy fur out of the way. And I'm going to wrap this stuff down really good. Make sure it's not going anywhere. Then I'm going to bring my thread in front of the eyes, the dumbbell eyes. Just pull these guys back a bit out of the way. Make sure they're sticking out well. And this is where I'm going to tie the last batch of fur in, just in front of the eyes of the hook. And this time I'm going to take a reasonably good sized clump of this stuff. And this stuff is actually not the same color all the way down. It's a little lighter near the bottom than it is at the top and tips. So I'm going to try and cut this off right down by the pelt to get some of that white stuff at the front. And pull the fuzz out. This is a nice long bit. I want that to be about as long as I can get it. Certainly as long as I can without extending too far back. And once again, I'm going to hold this at that angle. And I'm going to set that down where the butts are right at the eye of the hook. And do a loose wrap over it, cinch it down. And give a few good wraps. Then I'm going to wrap towards the eye. And I'm now pretty much done with adding stuff to the hook. So I'm going to turn it over. And I'm going to build this little cone-shaped head that you see on clouds or minnows out of pink thread. Turn it upside down again to make sure I'm not trapping any of that stuff. Build up a nice little cone head. And then I'm going to give it a whip finish. And I'm going to double it up just to be sure. Now you could get in there and put some glue on it, but I don't bother. If I have a double whip finish, I think it's probably good enough. And I don't want any glue getting on these fur, because it will mat it down. So now I can take it out of the hook shank, and using my bodkin, I can just stroke through this stuff and make sure there's roughly even amounts of fur on either side of the point of the hook. I have to play with it a bit. Then I
Can you
take my
show us
little,
what that looks like in your fish tank?
hang on a second, let me find my little, I have a little Velcro stick. Now, where'd it go? Oh, I got another one here. And I'm just gonna stroke this stuff back to make it so that it's all sliding to the back. Now, as you can see, this thing is pretty puffy when it's dry, but I'm going to put a little spit on it so that you can see what it looks like when it gets wet. Now, because of all the fuzz in the middle, this is not going to, on the bottom ends of the fur, it's not going to really cramp down in the middle, but it's going to go nice and pointy at the ends. So you can see you're going to get that shrimp shape out of this thing once it gets wet. So when you fish it, it's going to be shaped like a shrimp.
That's
in your
brilliant.
box.
That's a really nice fly.
It's going to look fuzzy, but and it's with all this little bits hanging out, it's going to have a lot of action. And because I've used fairly hefty eyes, dumbbell eyes, the eyes are going to rest in the marl on the bottom when you're fishing this on the flats. And it's going to cause that mud disturbance when you strip it. So there you go. That is a version of a mantis shrimp.
That's really nice, Dave.
According to my friend Andrew, he says that's going to work any place where you're going to fish for bonefish.
I'm sure that would work on or anywhere you have shrimp, period.
Yep, yep.
My only question would be, prior to using the resin on the eyes, could you not just colorize them first?
I suppose you could. I find that the eye, when you melt that little button, goes kind of a yellow color, and you could color that and then it's going to be clear around it. But I find it just as easy to put the resin on, set it up, and then use the marker. And I've got, like I said, I made some that these ones are clear, but I don't know, you can see they kind of look yellowish. And I don't know, it might look that yellowish color if you tried to color the mono in the center. I just take the Pantone pen and color the other side, and they work pretty good. Here's the black ones.
Where do you get the markers from?
Opus, the art store.
Oh, okay.
They sell these Pantone markers in 4,000 colors. I know 4,000, but hundreds of colors.
So what's it's Letraset, or is it something different?
That one's Letraset, and this is that one's a Letraset. There's other ones that are made by Pantone.
Okay.
And so the good ones are what they call Tria, because that's the Letraset ones. They have the 3 different points, but the Pantone ones are constructed basically the same way. That's a Pantone actually, by Letraset. And I have multiple colors because you can make, and I actually have a couple of olive ones that I pack in my vest, so that if your fly is light colored and you want a dark colored fly, it's easy enough to change it on the stream. So
Dave, like a regular permanent marker, like a Staples permanent marker, won't work?
Yeah. These ones are art markers, and once they're dry, they are waterproof.
Okay.
So I just discovered these.
I don't know if you thought of using like colored glass beads and just glue them to the mono after you melted those tips. You know, like slip the beads on the mono first, then melt the ends, and then
you could probably you probably could do that.
And you get a different sort of a look. I think what Tony was.
Yeah, the glass beads would be heavier.
Translucent kind of eyes.
Yeah, the glass beads would be heavier, and so but what you want is for these shrimp flies, you want these eyes to stick up because they're quite prominent on the shrimp, and when it's being stripped, the fish will key on those. So that's why I use 25-pound mono, and the plastic is light enough that it doesn't sink it down. So there you go. That's,
All you need is some bonefish to try it on.
well, yeah, but I think they'd work on anything like Jack Crevalle. If you're going to go up fishing in the warm water,
We should
I
have
think
stocked in Prospect.
Hmm?
We should have bonefish stocked in Prospect.
Yes, I'll tell you that for those who have not ever caught a bonefish, let me tell you,
God. It's so
they are unbelievable. The way that I heard it described to me is that if you pick a standard rainbow trout that you find in fresh water, and you about a 10-pounder, and you hook him and he runs, he will run at 5 to 8 miles an hour. A bonefish will hit 25.
Yeah. And you think you've got a 15, 20-pound fish on the line, you reel it in, and it's like 14 inches.
Yeah.
I
But
mean,
they
they're
just,
pound for pound, there's no fish like them on the planet.
and they will make not one, but 3 or 4 of those just screaming runs. They are without, I've not caught a permit, but I'd say next to a permit, they're probably the most fun fish to catch.
Mm.
My friend Ross Chow, the first year he and I went to Cuba. Now, some guys fish their entire careers and never catch a permit. Well, we were wading the flats just out of Anton Grande, and he spot, and the way you fish for a permit is you spot them tailing, and then you cast in front of them and let your fly sink, and then you hope they come over and look, and then you strip and hope that they pick your fly up. And some guys will do that for a lifetime and never catch one. Well, Ross saw this fin, and he had it wasn't one of these shrimp flies or a crab fly. It was one of these things, one of these crazy Charlies. So he just said, my rule of thumb is you see a fin, cast to it. So he did. And he caught a 12-pound permit. Took him an hour and a half to land it.
That's a beauty. Yeah, I know. Crazy, huh?
Crazy fish.
Well, my second ever bonefish, Dave, was 14 pounds.
Oh,
It was the biggest bonefish ever caught at Mars Bay.
that's a big bone.
Pure luck.
And it's funny how those big ones are just a slightly different color than the smaller ones.
Yeah, and they're normally solitary or in pairs.
Yeah, they're darker in color.
After the first run, I had like 2 or 3 wraps of backing left.
Yeah,
That was it. I mean,
a 100 to 200 yard run is not uncommon for those things.
oh yeah.
Like I say, when I caught the ones I caught when I was in Aitutaki, each one of them made 3 runs into the backing. And after the 7th fish that I landed and the 2 that I lost, I was done. I couldn't fight anymore. I said to the guide, I said, that's it, I'm done. Let's go back. I think I'll see if I can find a picture. If you have not.
Well, if you guys ever want to go bone fishing, the fellow at Mars Bay, it's probably price-wise for the quality of the fishing, probably the best.
So where's that?
On Andros Island in the Bahamas.
Yes.
A, it's easy to get to, you know, and B, it's very reasonable. It's fairly basic. It's clean and nice, but it's no swimming pool or resort feel. It's strictly for bone fishing. That's it. And he's quite reasonable price-wise. You know, it's not one of these, you know, $1,000, $1,500 a day things.
So can you see that? Is that showing?
See what?
Yeah, you haven't shared it to everybody there. Oh, here we come. There it is. Yeah.
So that's about 8 pounds, 7 to 8 pounds. And you can tell by looking at the color of the water in behind him. I never saw one of the fish that I hooked.
Yeah. Yeah.
Really?
The guide said, cast 70 feet, 10 o'clock, strip, 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 and then whack. Never saw the fish until it turned and hit the fly.
Well, in Andros, we could see schools of them coming.
Yeah.
And you could literally stand there and see these schools of 30, 40
Oh,
bones swimming towards you, and you just had to like make sure you got a decent cast. It doesn't have to be 70 feet.
Yeah.
It could be 40, 50 feet. And
Oh,
you
and
just put it in front and they swim towards it, and then you just strip once or twice and they nail
Yeah.
it. Boy.
when we were in Cuba, the groups were smaller. You'd see a few smaller groups, and the thing with Cuba was it was on the flats. They had no deep
Yeah.
water to go to, so they just absolutely went berserk. They didn't know where to run.
Yeah. No, it's
They'd run
stuff.
around.
You're wading mainly sort of knee deep.
Yep, yeah, on the marl. Yeah,
Yeah, knee deep.
it's
I think
it's a
was a
hoot.
bit of a pest was the sharks, but you know.
We didn't see any
Minor
sharks.
nuisance.
We never saw any sharks.
No, there's a lot of sharks in Bahamas. I mean, not that they really bother you, but you know, when you turn around and you've got a sort of a 6-foot shark behind you, it does bother you a little bit.
Yeah, it would. Yeah.
But, I mean, you just touch them with the tip of your rod and they skedaddle out of there so fast.
The other thing we did when we were fishing for bonefish is we used a lot of these guys here, crazy Charlies.
Crazy Charlies, yeah, lots of them.
And we would actually also fish regular plain old clouds or minnows when these things get in a little deeper water, like 20 feet, 15, 20 feet of water. They feed on the mud, and you can tell where they are because they stir the mud up and you get these big clouds of mud. So you'd fish the up current edge of the mud and you just cast out into that and then start stripping back. We got a lot.
Most of ours were caught, Dave, on these pink puffs. I don't know if you can see this.
Yeah.
Just a little straight pink puff with some grizzly. Pink, white, and black and white. That's it. Very simple. A little bit of flash.
Yeah. It's fun to do. Yeah.
Yeah.
If you have a chance. Or you should make the chance.
Yeah.
Make the chance.
Add to your bucket list.
I should organize a GRR trip and get a special price from Bill at Mars Bay.
That would be a hoot. That would be a great thing to do. All right.
Thank you, Dave. That was
Yeah.
So it's called, you don't have to use the flies that you tie. Sometimes it's just fun to learn techniques and have fun experimenting.
Well, if you look at the GRR website, I was reading it the other day, you know, the Legacy Fund was basically started by a member who passed, and he left over 4,000 flies that he tied, and his wife gave them to the club plus all the materials and so on. So you know, you figure out a guy's got 4,000 flies.
Yeah. Good stuff. So Florin's going to do us a stonefly, right? No.
Yeah, so this is something you can actually fish closer to home in your own backyard, so to speak. Not much traveling. Maybe you need to go to the Cowichan, I don't know.
Yes.
So this is a size 10 Tiemco, speaking of expensive hooks. Not as bad as the saltwater hooks. And I put on 1/8 of an inch copper tungsten bead. Given that the tungsten is heavy enough, I'm not going to put extra weight on the fly. Otherwise you can, or if you want extra heavy flies for faster current, whatever, you're gonna just add a little bit of wire here behind the bead. For thread, just standard run-of-the-mill uni thread in dark brown. Sorry, the writing is upside down because I'm trying to have the fly look the same way as I see it from the vise. And then just start with a little thread base here. And the first thing that's going to go on here is a little bit of a tail consisting of 2 goose biots in brown. So just go to about where the barb used to be before being pinched down. Do a tiny little bump there if you want to splay your biots out nicely. And this is just standard goose biots dyed brown. And I usually try to tie them together. And so what I do in preparation, I just take the biots between my fingers and put them so that they curve out, and then lay them against the hook and measure the correct size for a tail, which is about the gap of the hook for a stonefly. So then transfer to the other hand, do a couple of soft turns here, and then double check that things are actually where you want them to be. I just probably shouldn't be fussing so much with this. Okay, this side is looking good. This side is looking also good. It's kind of hard to see here a little bit because of the color, but then just do a couple more wraps here to tighten up, and the tails are nicely secure in place. Just move forward and wrap over the remaining bits of the biots. As you can see, they just keep twisting along the hook. Don't worry about that. Just the only thing to keep in mind with woven flies in general, what's important is that you maintain as smooth of an underbody as you possibly can. Okay, and because of that, I'm going to be running back and forth a few times with the thread. The next thing I'm going to put on is the wire rib. And I do these things, I try to match. If I use a copper bead, I use copper wire. I can do these things, and the pictures that I posted actually were done with gold wire and gold beads. So here's my rib all the way to where the tails are, and let it hang, and then go again back to the front. And now for the weaving, what I'm going to use is, you can use plain embroidery floss that needs a little bit of pre-tweaking. So what I do is I take the floss from the store, which comes in a little hank, and I pull it all apart, and I take about half of the thickness that it originally comes in. Then I take a length of that and I put it on an old thread spool. Otherwise, I can use, this is like standard fly tying floss, the acrylic variety. Don't try to use the other stuff, the acetate floss, because it does tear apart very easily, and you need to put some tension on this floss when you weave. So that's not very good. So this is four little strands. If you go to smaller flies, again, you're going to have to do the same thing. You're going to take 2 or 3 out of the 4 strands, and you're going to have to respool them. And so here the key ingredients are having the floss on a spool, and then I put the keeper on the spool as well, because this also nicely regulates the tension and it keeps things from going all over the place. And then put it all in a bobbin and have it ready. So what I have here already set up is a spool of brown floss. This is also embroidery floss, and some of it is shinier stuff. Some of it is a bit more on the matte side. So for today, I'm going to do a brown and a yellow. And then I have another yellow here, which is a little too thick here. This would need a few strands separated out of it. And this is very shiny stuff. Okay. So the way I'm going to do this, and now it's important to keep things on the right side of the hook. So for the material that I want on the bottom of the fly, I'm going to use the yellow right? So the bottom is going to be yellow, and that is going to go on the near side of the hook. So I'm going to make sure that I wrap this along and that it goes on my side of the hook. Okay. And let it hang. Then I take the brown floss and I attach that on the far side of the hook. This is going to be the back of the fly. Okay, so again, attach it at the front and then go with the thread to the end. Okay. Make sure that in the process you're not creating any unsightly bumps. And now let the floss hang, and for the thread not to get in the way of your weaving, just do a little knot here. I just use the whip finisher because it's easy. And now the fly is ready to weave. Now, if I try to weave in this position, I probably create a mess of a fly. So I'm not going to try that. What I'm going to do instead, and this is going to take me a moment here to set up, is I'm going to move to another fly tying vise, which is set up here. And I'm going to tinker with the orientation so you can actually see the same thing that I'm seeing. So this should be on the left side. So this needs to be not mirrored. Okay, I think this is probably the right orientation. And let's do a little background here. Okay. Sorry, one more thing. Okay, so this is what you're seeing. This is my right hand. This is my left hand. So we're in business now. Okay, so take the hook with all the things hanging off it, which is floss and wire, and bring all of this over here. It's a lot easier to do than this little presentation makes it look like, because when I tie these flies, I don't use a camera. Okay. So here I've got my hook upside down. This makes it easier to see what you're doing, and it makes it easier to keep the tension right and everything. So now I'm looking at my hook from above. And let me get this little window out of the picture. Okay. So I'm looking at the hook from above, and I have the two bobbins in my hands, right? So the yellow is in my right hand and the brown is in my left hand. The yellow goes on top now, like this, and the brown is going to be the bottom. Now remember, this is upside down, so this is then going to come out the right way. I'll have a yellow belly and the brown back. And the weaving is fairly simple once you get the hang of it. So you move across, right? So you pull across the yellow, which is going to be your belly, and then you hook it with the brown, which you then pass under to the other side. Now you've got your hands crossed over. Then you move the yellow back over the belly and you hook it on the other side with the brown, and then you move back the brown again. And then you just keep going, you keep doing this, and you keep these turns, the wraps, tight up against each other. And you just do this. And now I have a fair bit of hook shank. I can keep going. The important thing that's going to get you a nice uniform weave is to try to keep the tension constant, because if you loosen up one side or the other, you can end up with things spinning around the hook, and it's not going to look pretty. Now I'm just going here to the end, and for the last, I'm not doing anything fancy. I just let things hang. And now I'm going to take it out of this vise. So this is strictly for the weaving part. I'm going to reattach the thread and cut off the floss, right? So we're done with the weaving, okay? So the only important technique here is really to figure out the weaving, and using the bobbins makes it really, really, really easy, okay? I'm going to move back the camera to the other vise. So just bear with me for another couple of moments. Okay. There we are. We got the vise in the field again. Yeah, I have more than a fly tying vise, but several cameras. That's going a little far. Let's see. This is upside down. I'll have to readjust this. Alternatively, what you can do is, if you have a proper rotary vise, the one thing you can do is you just flip the hook over, because it's easier to weave in this way and to avoid the hook point in the process. And okay, almost.
My dog is barking at something. I have to go out into the backyard.
Okay, no problem. All right, I don't want this upside down anymore. I just want it right side up, sorry. Still. Okay, now you can see what this looks from a different angle, and I'm going to flip it over again. So it needs to be, okay, so you can actually see it. Okay. So there's more adjusting camera than tying here. That's the painful part. Okay. I probably don't need it magnified so much. All right. Oof. So now I'm just going to take the same old thread. I'm going to attach it at the front here. I don't have to worry too much about what this looks like, because this is where the thorax is going to go. Just make sure that the floss is well attached, and that you cut the floss and not the thread. So cut the floss, and this is the brown one. Just want to make sure it's well secured over there. And put the floss out of the way, okay? We can do some tidying up wraps now, or we can do them later. It's not really important. Okay, now is the time not to forget that we've got a rib to put on. Make sure I'm not squashing the tails. So now I'm going to take advantage of the little knots that have been created in the weaving process to take this rib and move it forward at an angle and put it basically in between, follow those little knots and put the rib right in between them. Okay, so you get a nice even look to the whole thing. And I'm just going to go in here to the head of the fly, behind the bead with the wire. Secure it with a couple of wraps of thread, and then just helicopter. It's not slipping a little bit. Let me few more wraps here. Okay, this is a little bit thick wire, so it's a little harder to helicopter, but it'll give way eventually. Okay, here we are. And then here it's really a choice of what do you want for legs. And I just opt for the simplest thing, which is just use a little bit of seal fur dubbing. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I just move the thread back for the size of a thorax, and then just take some plain brown seal fur. The seal fur is, in my experience, not the easiest material to dub with. It makes beautiful dubbing, but it's a little hard and springy, and it just has a tendency to bounce back and whatever. So what I like to do typically on these flies, especially if they're big enough, I have room to thicken up, you know, with extra thread and whatnot, just do a little dubbing loop. Okay. So the usual simple thing where I just use my pliers, my hackle pliers, double up the thread after dubbing the seal fur, move the thread forward, and then just spin the hackle pliers and then wrap. This tightens up the dubbing a fair bit, but I can always fix that later by brushing a little bit. So here I just build up the thorax. All the way to behind the bead. And at this point, just cut off the dubbing loop, holding the thread out of the way. And the fly is almost done. So I'm doing my 2 whip finishes behind the bead. So this gets all buried in there. Trim. And just use a little teaser to get some of that seal fur sticking out. Eventually it will, you know, the fish will do that for you. But if you want to have a nice look to it to start with, you know, just tease out the dubbing a little bit. That'll work. One could also play with adding, you know, doing a little bit of dubbing for the thorax, and then using also some soft hackle for the rest of the legs. Either way, it works well. And I like to tie these things mostly in sizes 10 and 12s, but you can go up and you can go down in size as well. And you can use this technique to, you know, to weave caddis larvae and anything else that strikes your fancy. It's the only weaving technique I actually know.
Very nice fly, Flor.
And yeah, thank you.
Good.
And you know, once you figure out how to do this, you can do it with wire. You can do with whatever you want. You just need to put your things on a spool.
Yeah, I've done the caddis larva using embroidery thread.
Yeah, that's what I'm using most of the time. Is I'm using the embroidery floss.
Yeah.
And that comes in the absolute all colors of the rainbow. So, yep. And then some more. So you can experiment with whatever you want. You know, there's some metallic embroidery flosses. There, you know, all kinds of crazy stuff. And the fly is also very sturdy if you tie it like this. There's
In
nothing.
in that color combination with green and yellow, that's very reminiscent of what we used to call the green Montana. Which
Yeah,
is a
the
pretty
idea,
productive.
yeah, my idea when tying this is I'm thinking golden stones and similar
Yeah.
stuff. But you can vary the hues a little bit, and I've tried a few with, you know, orange bellies and whatever.
Yeah.
It's a good, if you wait very much, you can use it in places where you can use two hooks together. You can use this as your ballast fly, and then tie a tiny little nymph at the end of it.
Not in
And that's
BC.
a combo that works pretty well down here in Alberta. And
Yeah.
otherwise, you can also fish this in shallower runs with an indicator, and that works well as well.
Thanks to both of you. I've got to run. My dog is dying for his walk. That was really entertaining, both of you.
Yeah.
A bit of what Florin was doing was looked to me like the fly tying equivalent of Cirque du Soleil with all that twisting around. I thought, what's he doing there?
Yeah.
Anyway, great. Thanks. Have a good weekend, everybody.
You can,
Guys.
the reason I put the camera that way and spend all that time fussing with it is if anybody wants to actually give it a try, you get to see exactly the position of the hands and the threads going through the weaving process.
Yeah.
So it's, you know, if you want to give it a try, just don't despair if the first one doesn't look perfect, because it's just a matter of getting the tension even that gets you those even knots. I don't want to show you some of my early flies that I did with this technique that don't look very good.
I'm gonna stop the recording there.